Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my Let's Play Krastorio series. I mean, in reality, this is actually kind of episode 1. Not really, but anyway. I made a slight mistake on episode 1 when I set up that first map, and that was that I didn't put any biters in it, and it turns out that you need them for research and for science. And I didn't know that. And I suppose this is kind of where you get to when you launch into a set of mods without any sort of research or investigation into what's required with those sets of mods. So what I've done is I've thrown that old base in the bin, started completely from scratch with biters on this turn, and I'm just going to whiz through the base as quickly as possible, the starter base, so that we can arrive back at the point where this episode should have begun, which is at the point where I'm starting to build the main factory, and I've just finished the starter factory. So let's whiz through it and get to the point where I should be. Okay, so this is where we should have been at the start of this episode, but because of my oversight, we are where we are. Anyway, rebuilding this starter factory has definitely given me a chance to do it better. Let's just put it that way, to improve the layout. I'm still producing more or less exactly the same as it was before, albeit with some small upgrades. Like I'm taking stone block a lot more seriously. Obviously I needed a lot more walls with biters, so a lot of blocks very useful. But otherwise, most of this stuff down here, most of the same, iron and copper. Then, you know, this is with the benefit of some forethought and some advanced knowledge of these mods from that aborted first attempt. I've got steel, coke and wood over on this side, and then I've got glass and stone and sand over here with landfill in between. And I've just discovered that we get access to concrete this early on. Refined concrete, so well, that's going to make my life a whole lot easier. I can build paths right from the beginning. That's a new thing. So that's kind of this starter part. Then I've got my path. Then I've kind of dealt with all of the little bits. So I've got beams and gears, rods, whatever. I've dealt with all of that first, and then I can get on with all of the stuff that I need for the factory, which is all the assembly machine based stuff. All the same base, all nice and regular now. It's a much better layout. I mean, there is a certain elegance to complete chaos, but it's much nicer in my mind when it's regularly laid out, and I'm happier. Let's just leave it like that. What I want to talk about is what's next, and what's next is this recipe right here. Yes. So this is the enriched iron process that I'm going to have to use at some point in the future, but I don't have access to it just yet. But this is what I'm going to use to make iron for the factory. I'm just going to build it, and then I'll leave it there and use the starter base to feed it with the iron that I need to unlock this, and then I can turn it on. So what I need to do is I need to build a process which deals with this recipe. Now, what I see when I look at this recipe, firstly, we've got 7.5 iron ore input, and we get 5 enriched iron output from that. So what that tells me is that we need a blue belt input and a red belt output, and that way we can achieve those ratios. So I want to create a block with a blue belt of iron ore in and a red belt of iron plate out. That's the plan. Now, we also have some excess liquids to deal with, this dirty water. Now, my immediate thoughts, you know, considering the videos that we're making recently, my immediate thoughts when I looked at this was that that's a barrelable thing, but it's not a barrelable. It's not really worthwhile. There's nothing. It's not a valuable material. It doesn't really do a lot. You know, we can only really turn it into iron, copper, or this rare metals thing, which I did think about routing all this dirty water somewhere so I could get access to this rare metals. But these raw rare metals are on the map as all patches of ore. Although looking at it, I don't have access to any just yet. But that I'm going to get access to that at some point in the future. That rare raw metals, it's not worth harnessing. We can just mine more of it. So the plan is to deal with this all on site. Obviously we can turn it into iron ore so I can re-input it back into the system. And because we need 15 casting machines to do this process, I'm going to build 16 so that we can deal with that a little bit excess. Also, what I want to talk about is trains, because I've been looking at the trains, and there's a small subtle difference with the trains in these mods. So we can, everything is the same with trains. We can store the same amount of ore on a cargo wagon as we can in vanilla. The difference is that now block size of ore is 200 instead of 50. So a single cargo wagon will now store 8,000, whereas it only stored 2,000 in the vanilla version. Now, I had a thought about, I did have a think about this, but ultimately it comes down to the mines, and the mines are exactly the same. They produce the same amount of ore as they do in vanilla with the same sort of upgrades, as far as I can tell at this point in time. So the ultimate ramification of having been able to store 8,000 on a cargo wagon won't actually increase output. It's not going to increase throughput. What it means is that the cargo wagons are going to take longer to load, and they're going to be sat at the base station for longer unloading. And the ultimate from that is that we're going to have less train interactions on the network. They're going to be sat at the stations loading and unloading for much longer periods of time. That's okay. That's all going to be part of the average that I've used, because we're not changing the ultimate output, which is what the mines can produce. So what that leads me to think is that we can have a similar sort of railway network, but have more trains on it, because they're traveling less, so they're much likely to interact. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to play out in this base, because I'm still kind of feeding my way through it. I don't think I'm going to go for some ginormous 100 trains or whatever, but I think, yeah, it was just a thought that I went through to kind of figure out how big I want this stuff to be. You know, how much ore do I want to mine, and then thus how many trains do I need to be able to provide that. I still haven't reached a decision on that yet. I'm going to see how it plays out when I start building, but that's kind of where my thought process is. You know, I can kind of allow myself a few more trains on the network with a much simpler train network, and I think it would still do okay. But what I want to do now is I want to build this process on the map. That's what I want to do. I want to show you my thought process. I've had a lot of time to think about this. I've got a lot of good ideas. Let's get going. So this is kind of the process that I've been trying to figure out in my head the last few hours. Well, maybe probably a fair bit longer than a few hours. But you know, this reminds me of a process that in Angel and Bob. It's very similar actually, where we put in some. It's exactly the same. We put water into a system. We use that water. It outputs some other dirty version of water as an excess product at the end of the process. And then we recycle that dirty water to get something else, and it outputs water as its output. So we can reuse that output water as an input, as long as we can keep the balance of water in the system, you know, at a relatively decent level. You know, as long as we've got enough space for water to be taken out of the system and for water to be added to the system, then it doesn't actually use any water. So that's what I've got here. This is the line that I'm going to have for water. These are the tanks that are going to kind of measure how much water is in the system, and then these pumps will only put water back into the system when these are less than 40% of their capacity. So that's the number that I've used. 10,000. They've got a capacity of 25,000. These, so that's kind of how I've kept the water in the system to get that to a right level. Then we've got the 16 chemical plants, and again, this is another thing that I did in Angel and Bob, which is to put things in the middle. So if you imagine we're producing water, dirty water over here and over here, and they're kind of in the middle squeezing these filtration units, it kind of, in my mind, it keeps the flow of the liquid regular. we essentially get more bang for our buck with these pipes because they're going in two directions, with the central units in the middle. And then once the iron ore has been processed, it will be put into these steel furnaces, and then we get our lovely iron plate out at the end. Now, that's kind of where my mind was heading. What I wanted was a long, thin, slender process that I can tile together and create. And I mean, this is what I do with all the factories. I have a block, and then I put loads of those blocks next to each other, and then I feed those blocks, and then stuff happens. That's kind of the plan. Now, in terms of where I'm going to go with it from here, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 12 of these in total for iron. And if you imagine a big square, I'm going to have 3 of them in each corner. And then let's have a look at the map. If you imagine we've got a big bit, well, it's not really going to be a big square. It'll probably be like this. And then we're going to have some railways along the top. That's where I'm going to put the railway stations. That's going to output iron down into this block. And then I'm going to have the iron in here. Then I'm going to try and do. I think what I'm going to do is do computer chips, and then copper, and then I'm going to put steel in here. But you know, I've done this much so far. So I mean, I've got these big plans, but who knows what I'm going to find along the way. So, and then once we've got these railway lines at the top, then we've got the block with the stuff that's happening. Then we're going to have this zone in here, which is where the starter base is. This is going to be kind of my railway interchange zone. So all of this is just going to be kept blank, completely blank lane for trains to interact and move. And then we're going to have if you imagine what we have is we've got this kind of long, thin block up here dealing with the iron, the steel, copper, and the computer chips. Then I'm imagining in my mind that we've got another long, thin block down here which deals with processes which I don't know exist yet. You know, I'm thinking oils, and I'm looking at these fluids in here. This is what is it really used for. This is one of the mods that I get a lot of use out of, and there's a lot of fluids in here, and I don't think I'm anywhere near finding out what any of them do yet. So you know, future places for expansion, keeping that in mind for what's going to happen. That's nice, and I like to have some sort of a plan. However, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plonk down more of these. Start feeding it with conveyor belts, and then once I've got enough of that down, I can start thinking about the next thing. That's the plan. So someone has just commented on that first episode, and it's kind of sent my mind into a bit of a tailspin. If you're new to this series and you haven't watched the first vanilla series that I did, then occasionally I'm going to subject you to just the random thoughts that pop into my head as I'm building these things. You know, these things take hundreds of hours, and you know, sometimes your mind just wanders, and this comment has sent me into a bit of a whirlwind because it's something that I haven't thought to explain, and the reason I didn't think to explain it was because I don't know, it just never occurred to me. So the comment was, you know, the base you set out for the starter base in that first episode, which you know which I've since rebuilt a new one. You built it blind, and yet it was also packed in together, and you know, she called it neat. I think it was she. The commenter said that it was very neat. And I was just like, well, how do you achieve that neatness? And it was just, I think the crux of it was, how do you achieve that neatness, but without really knowing what you're doing? You know, when you're doing these things completely blind. And the only real explanation I can give is that Angel and Bob. You know, I spent 2 years developing a single factory in Angel and Bob. It wasn't the same factory. I would build one. Then I would go away for a month or two and think about how I could improve it, and then I would go back and build a new one, and then I would wait maybe another 4 months and then start. You know, whenever I felt like doing one, I would pick it up and I would just hit it. And I did that over maybe 5 or 6 times over the period of 2 years. And in that 2 years, the recipes were always changing. Always, the game was always, every time I picked it up, I'd have to relearn how all of this stuff was being made. And I'm certain there was a game where I was in the middle of a map and a recipe changed, a new ingredient popped up that just out of nowhere. And let me just give you some sort of context. So, in those Angel and Bob bases, I was laying down a bus, and that bus maybe had 30 conveyor belts in it, 30 individual items, and for all of those 30, none of those 30 items had I researched. I had just laid down a conveyor belt, and I knew that I would need it at some point in the future, and I just kept meticulous notes. So all of this was done blind. All of this was done with empty conveyor belts. I would spend 100, 150 hours building a factory with just no ingredients in it, because you wouldn't be able to research all of it. But I wanted to be able to build it, because that's really the important part. I wanted to build it, I wanted to lay it down, and I wanted to forget about it. I didn't want to have to demolish or play around with it. So as a result of all of this, I got very, very good at researching what the ingredients are for things, working out what are the important things that I need to consider, what are the things that I need to care about. I got very good at making notes, and I got very good at building this stuff blind. I got very good at like taking a particular recipe, maybe not even one particular recipe, but a collection of recipes, and bundling them together into a collection so that all of the ingredients and inputs and outputs kind of made sense. And there's a few things that are happening right now which are important to which are relevant to that story. So everything is blind. I haven't researched any of this. What I've explained the story that I'm going to do. I've got this square, and I'm going to have 3 of these lines in each corner of the square. So I've built 6 of those lines. I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I've got the 6 of them here already. What I need to do is I need to route all of this stuff through a central bus. So there's the top half and the bottom half of this square. There's going to be a bus that runs through the middle of it, but I don't know what's going to be in that bus. I'm going to build computer chips over here, and I am guessing there's going to be all medley of ingredients and things that I'm going to need, but that's just stuff, really, when it comes down to it, that's going to be routed in and out of the bus. So as long as when I build the computer chips, I deal with all of the inputs, all of the outputs, and I present all of those inputs and outputs to the bus. When I've reached the end of this whole process, and when I get to copper, which is the end, there's not going to be any more further processes beyond that. I can just deal with all of these things in isolation. I can build the bus, and then once I've got the bottom half of the bus sorted, I can just copy it, build the top half, and then I can copy this on top of that. And that's how I'm going to build it. And that's how I'm going to build it completely blind, without really knowing what I'm going to do. At this point in time, I know it's going to need stuff in the bus, but I don't know what it is. But as long as there's a space in that bus, and I allot space for it in that bus, and as long as I keep good records of the spaces that I have allotted, then theoretically this is just an end stage process. It's not going to be the process is going to end here. I can butt all of the conveyor belts up to that, and then anything else that leads out, I can deal with somewhere else in the factory. And from a future progression point of view, I will use these ingredients in these buses that I haven't unlocked to work out what I need to build next. Like if I need to get access to a red chip, and the red chip needs something to be mined and purified or something, then I'll know that because I'll have this recipe, this ingredient in a conveyor belt in a bus. And I don't know where that will come from. And then by finding out what I need to build for those things, I can use the mods that I use. So that's the next stage in the process, is the mods that I use to get to the bottom of this. And those 2 mods are hell mods, which I'm sure you may not have had access to. You may have played around with it yourself. But for me, this is fundamental in working out all the recipes without having to dive. I spent in Angel and Bob before I really even knew that these mods were existed, and they might not even have existed when I started on Angel and Bob. I spent a long time in Angel and Bob trying to find the relevant technologies in this chart that I would need to research to be able to produce the thing that I needed to produce. It wasn't always clear cut. It wasn't always obvious. And the list of technologies in Angel Bob is like, I don't know, 3 times bigger, 4 times bigger. I don't know. It's massive. So trying to find the one technology that you need to get access to in this whole list was a real pain in the backside. So when I got access to Helmord, I think that was the first one. This was just absolutely priceless. Planning out your recipes, I would highly recommend it. The second mod that I use is this one, is what is it really used for? So the first thing that we can do is we can click on the question mark on this little magnifying glass, which isn't a zoom, by the way, and it will give access to all of the liquids that are in the game. So we can find out where any of these liquids are produced. How do we produce them? Let's have a click on chlorine, see where that goes. So we find out it's an ingredient in hydrogen chloride, so it's only an ingredient in one place. That's good to know. And we produce it via water electrolysis or from this lithium method. So we've got alternate recipes to produce the same thing. And then if we go over here and we click hydrogen and we want to find out where that comes from, we get it's an ingredient in ammonia, it's an ingredient in water, obviously. Hydrogen chloride, which is just where we were, and then these are the ways that we can produce it. So that's the first thing that this can do. It can tell us how and where the liquids are coming from. If we want to find out where a particular product, how that's made, then we just pick it up from our inventory and just drag it in the question mark, and it gives us everything. So whilst I was building this starter base, this was an important question I needed to ask. What things needed a pipe? The way that I do this is that I build a little thing for pipe here, and then I feed anything in this block has to have or needs to have be related to that pipe. I don't want to put any other processes with pipe anywhere else. So I want, if I'm going to build a part of the factory with part of this kind of shopping mall part, as you like to call it, with pipes in it, I like to have all of the things that need pipes very, very close by. So I make a list. I go into here, I say, what do I put a pipe in? And I make a list. I go, okay, I need it in pipe to ground, I need it in a pump, I need it in valves, I need it in a fluid wagon, I'm not doing boiler or steam engine. And I just go down the list, what needs a pipe? And I do the same with block, because block's another awkward one. So if we go into refinery, we go into block, we can find out where the block goes. And to be honest, it's more or less exactly the same as it is in vanilla. So with those two mods, I can kind of figure out where I'm going. And when you start with these new packages and mods, the starting place to start from is always iron and copper, because once you can get your iron and copper established, and steel as well, once you get those 3 things established, you've actually produced quite a lot of the factory that you're going to need. That's it's probably 20-30% of your factory is in iron and copper and computer chips, which is what I'm going to do here. 20-30% I would imagine is probably this part of the factory. So if I can just deal with this in one isolated corner, I can forget about it and move on to other things. So that's kind of how I'm approaching this process, although it does have its pitfalls, and I've just discovered one of them, and I'm going to tell you what it is, because this is also relevant. This is what happens when you blindly follow your way through and you don't really think things through properly. If you've not done it before, you don't. So anyway, here we go. I've laid all this down, no gaps, looks perfect, very, very happy with it. The problem is that my plan is to have this block here and then the stations up here. Whereas previously I would normally put the stations in the middle. I'm not doing that this time. I'm trying to keep things a bit simpler. So I'm putting the stations up here. So what that means is all of the belts, all of the iron ore needs to come through and feed these blocks. But I'm going to have 3 more blocks up here and 3 more blocks up here. But I have not allowed for the ore or the plate that comes from those blocks. Now the plate I don't need to worry about, because the plate's going to be going through this central block, this central bus. But I definitely do need the ore. So I need to I need 3 more belts here, and I need 3 more belts here. So I need to pick all of this half up, and I need to move it across 6 tiles. The quest for perfection. This is what it takes. And I know what? I'm totally willing. I'm happy to move this 6 tiles to the left. Absolutely no problem at all. There's a problem. I found it. I'm happy I found it. I want to fix it. In the long run, it won't matter. And when I come round to doing the copper, It just means that I can copy this, and I'll be and that's you know, that's a whole other section that if I messed up, I'd have to. Would I mess that up as well? No, I would fix it. And then having them not match, that would be annoying to me. So yeah, this is getting blueprinted and moved 6 tiles left. That's another thing I want to just mention before I finish this little thought process. I've added a few extra mods. I figured, well, we're in Krastorio. We've got we're in pretty heavy packages and mods anyway. Who cares? So I've got autofill, and I've got blue build. That was it, which helps me to remove stuff and use blueprints at this early stages without robots. And what was the other one? Oh, wood to landfill. That was yeah. I've got all this wood. I don't have any way to use it, so I may as well put it into landfill. And landfill is always a pain to produce. Anyway, let me continue. I'm going to move this whole block 6 tiles left. Yeah. Okay, whole block moved, 6 tiles to the left. I've got my spare belts up here, got all the space I need. Happy days. And if you're ever watching any of my other time lapses and you see what you've just seen there, which is me demolishing something and then immediately rebuilding it almost identically, then it's because I've made a mistake. You know, that's what you're watching. You're watching me record the mistakes that I make. I show all of this stuff. I'm not afraid of any of it. You know, and if you really watch closely in some of those old time lapses, what you'll see is that I've made that mistake 3-4 times in a row. So I would make one mistake, I'd have to rebuild it all, and then in rebuilding it all and putting it back together and investigating, I'd find another mistake and I'd have to move it all again, and then maybe even again after that. Hey, I'm not gonna hide. I like this stuff to be perfect. If I find a mess, something that I don't like, I'm gonna fix it. Anyway, I'm gonna try and keep these videos to about the half-hour mark because that seems to be a much more reasonable length. I think the 45 minutes that I was aiming for last time was a little bit on the long side. And besides, with these time lapses, it's quicker. There's less stuff in the middle between shots. So I think half hour is about what I'm going to aim for. So that's it for another episode. I mean, it doesn't really feel like I've done much factory. I mean, I have actually built a whole new starter factory and I've built all of this. But from the video's perspective, I've only really built the iron enrichment. I suppose that's kind of what happens when you spend 10 minutes on a single thought process. Anyway, that's episode 2. Till next time.